wir sind auf jeden Fall weniger geworden. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jörg Haspel, and I was the state conservationist of Berlin for some years, and also president of ICOMOS Germany. And today I'm the moderator who will take us through this session. I would like to welcome you on the behalf of the organizers of Thomas Flirl and the foundation, Max Lingner Foundation, and of ICOMOS Germany, with Tino Mager, who is the president of ICOMOS Germany, of the German National Committee. And I would like to welcome all of you here in the auditorium in the Max Lingner House, as well as in the screens worldwide or abroad. I was asked to guide us today as a moderator through the second evening of the series of 3 evening seminars or evening workshops on what we call socialist modernism in Central and Eastern Europe. Like the evenings yesterday and the evening tomorrow, this Wednesday evening is also dedicated to the International Day of Monuments and Sites, which ICOMOS celebrates since 1982. This year, the title of this global heritage conservation event is Heritage Changes. And that means that heritage has always to be adapted and reshaped for contemporary uses and functions and needs, and that it is part and that it contributes to social, cultural changes as well. And we in Berlin, we have taken this motto, Heritage Changes, as an opportunity to discuss in depth a controversial topic, the young heritage of socialist modernism in Central and Eastern Europe, that is our headline, or the heritage of modern times in Central and Eastern Europe. And in keeping with the spirit of an open and innovative and constructive intergenerational dialogue, the International Day of Monuments and Sites in 2023 aims to provide showcase strategies of heritage research as well as of heritage practices which deliver climate resilient and inclusive pathways to low carbon futures. That is the main aim of the International Day of Monuments and Sites. And maybe unlike yesterday and tomorrow, today's event is likely to raise and leave more questions than it can answer. An evening and a place where the heritage of socialist modernism in Ukraine and in the Russian Federation is to be presented and discussed together under the geographical and political umbrella term of Central and Eastern Europe, as it is the case today in the Max Lingner House, that seems a little bit out of time. Some may say it is inappropriate and even outrageous, some will think. This is not altered by the fact that the first ideas for a cross-border lecture and discussion series of the legacy with Dimitri Buzou, that it dates back years. It took place, or the starting point was from the first volume, which were produced in 2018 about Moldavia and Romania, and 1 year later the German album followed. This was years ago, and the albums of Ukraine and the Russian Federation, which we are focusing today, they were already on print or on sale when Russia attacked Ukraine on the 24th of February last year, bringing death and destruction to millions of people, as well as devastation and destruction to the country, its infrastructure, its cultural and its nature in a war of aggression that violates international law. On the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russian troops, in Germany, many commemorative and solidarity activities took place everywhere in the country at the end of February. And in Berlin, the cultural and political event was Café Kiev, We Choose Freedom. And I think it probably attracted most people to a place, and this was due to great part, it was due to the site where this took place. This was the Café Moscow on the Karl Marx Allee, a protected architectural monument of modern movement of the late 60s, an icon of what we call East modernism and a part of the Berlin's World Heritage application. Yesterday we started in front of Café Moscow, in front of the Kino International, and on the opposite side there was Café Moscow, created by Josef Kaiser and Helmut Bauer with the Heller graffiti mosaic. In a contemporary artistic action, the organizers had renamed the legendary location in Café Kiev, and inside event rooms were given names like the cities of Ukraine: Kiev, Kharkiv, Kherson, Lviv, Odessa, Zaporizhia, etc. And the organizers explained that they wanted to send, that is a quotation, send a signal by changing the names of the anniversary. We are thus showing that Kiev is closer to us than Moscow in geographic and in political terms. And thousands of visitors flooded into Café Kiev, alias Café Moscow, on this weekend to learn about the current situation in Ukraine through video clips, augmented reality installations, or discussions. And again, the photos, the films of the Russian armed forces' work of destruction and devastation took the center stage. Ruins, rubbles, fragments of large settlements of socialist modernism and mass housing estates will not leave visitors' mind, and not to forget the immense reconstruction efforts and costs that this war will require. Today, we want to continue yesterday's discussion using Ukraine and Russia as an example. We want to talk about monument values and monument criteria for the protection and preservation of post-war testimonials, and possibly also discuss them controversially. Is this only about singular or even spectacular individual works of art and architecture and solitary solution, or is it not just standardized serial architecture such as type buildings or building types such as mass housing that is of particular historical and cultural interest and significance? And we should not lose sight of the social value that is being discussed throughout Europe for ecological reasons and for the reorientation of the building industry in a resource-conscious and energy-efficient way. And we should discuss this topic always keeping in mind the disturbing images of war-damaged cities and heritage sites in Ukraine. Built testimonies of socialist modernism are only rarely registered as legal monuments in the list of the state authorities. Yesterday we learned that, for example, in Bulgaria there were 4 post-war heritage sites listed. This was Dimitrovgrad, as you can call it a socialist company town or an industrial town. This was Buzlucha. This was the bell tower in Sofia, and the Schumann Memorial. But it is also true that quantitatively, the buildings and structures built between the end of Second World War and the opening of the Iron Curtain make a very large part of the surviving building volume in many cities and regions of Europe, and that they represent an immense social and cultural and economic challenge for all of us. The Socialist Modernism project, which Dumitru Rusu initiated and put for discussion on behalf of Baku today, is part of a growing interest in the legacy of the recent past, not only in Central and Eastern Europe, but Europe-wide or also worldwide, including Asia. The photo albums of Baku are, so to speak, partial contributions to a kind of work in progress. They can be updated by self-publishing through expanded new editions. They can be supplemented geographically and thematically with new release. And seen in this way, it's an open publication system with image and reading material that invites us to participate and to contribute in the same time. And we have to consider that not only books are the result and instrument, but also the digital maps and websites, which are much more frequented than books are sold and bought. And of course, we also could ask ourselves, should the photo album of worth-seeing destinations in Ukraine be completed, for example, in this case, or linked to an inventory of damaged and destroyed buildings and heritage sites in Ukraine? The Baku Group, the Bureau for Art and Urban Research, and Dumitru Rusu define themselves as an association for conservation of urban and cultural rehabilitation. The first volume was published in 2018, as already mentioned, and since then, I think about a dozen books have been issued, including photo anthologies on Ukraine and the Russian Federation, on Ukraine in 2021 and Ukraine in 22. The albums of the Balkan region and the Baltic states took center stage yesterday. The recent volume on Ukraine and the Russian Federation followed today. And tomorrow there is the final meeting, which will close with the presentation and discussion of the album on socialist modernism in Germany, that is the former GDR. And I'm very happy that Mrs. Agermann is with us. She is one of the speakers of the National Committee of 20th Century, and tomorrow she will also participate in this panel discussion. The long-term Baku project is accompanied and supported by interactively expandable web platform Socialist Modernism. And this is also includes an interactive map of all objects documented online on the website. And there are also, which I would like to mention and to show, handy fold out maps which have been published for a number of cities and regions, like, for example, here for Berlin and Potsdam, which are very handy and very informative to give a short orientation and information. And I only missed a map, for example, of Kiev or Lviv for some of these cities as well, to provide this kind of information. The Bureau of Art and Urban Research, Baku, is represented tonight by Dumitru Rusu. He is the speaker, the spokesman of Baku, and like the Socialist and Heritage Initiative, he is based in Moldavia as well as in Romania. He did his bachelor's degree in architecture and his master's degree in heritage conservation in Romania, and is currently presenting his doctoral thesis on the heritage of Socialist Soviet Republic of Moldavia from 1945, that means from the beginning of the Soviet Republic to the end in 1991 in Chisinau. He is ICOMOS member in Moldavia and Romania, and he is member of the Presidium of ICOMOS Scientific Committee on 20th Century, and we look forward to his report and to his perspective, which is very urgent in these days and maybe also in this audience. Because we mentioned yesterday and in the morning, Anna Broniewskaja also mentioned the books of Verbesserter, of Chauvin, of Campenas, of German, Slovenian, French, Belgian authors. These books of Dumitru, they are not about Central and Eastern Europe. They are from and for Central Europe. And it's for these Central and Eastern Europes, and I hope that it is also for these local and regional communities. So it is of importance for us, and I'm pleased to announce, together with the main speaker of this evening, a whole series of experts from Ukraine and Russia. Some have contributed to the Baku project, Socialist Modernism, and others have expressed their readiness to complement the lecture with additional comments and statements. And despite the adverse circumstances I mentioned at the beginning, this evening does not remain a one-man show reporting on Russia and Ukraine from Romania and Moldavia, but experts from both countries will contribute their point of view. And I'm really very happy, together with Thomas Flill, that we succeeded to host you here, that 8 colleagues have joined our meeting here to share their experience and perspective, either online or even in presence here in Berlin. And please join me in extending a warm welcome, first of all, to Vital Shulyar, who is now with us in Lviv in Ukraine. He is the author of the introduction of the Ukraine volume, and he will follow the presentation of Dumitru with a starting comment from his point of view. He is an architect and urban planner who did this kind of introduction. And secondly, I would like to welcome Anna Ponovitskaya. She is from Russia. She's based in Moscow, was based in Moscow, came today from, or yesterday from Munich or from Erevan she came, and is an expert on 20th century heritage with numerous research and publications and actions on modern architecture and art since years. She also produced architectural guides to modern movement in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and in Alma-Ata, and now she is preparing the Erevan volume. I would like to welcome very heartily and cordially Pavlo Kravchuk. He's the conservationist of Zaporizhia. He graduated in history, and since 2014 he is employed as a specialist in the city's Department of Culture and Tourism. He's the creative director of the digital portal Zaporizhia Heritage, and he is a coordinator of a program for protecting cultural and historical monuments of Zaporizhia city. And I think it is one of the most remarkable, if not risky, heritage conservation jobs he does Europe-wide in Zaporizhia. And so we are very happy that you are here with us. Welcome Karli Yavenia Molya from Ukraine. She is an art historian from Kiev, worked recently, I think, in the Biblioteca Hertziana in Rome, with Max Planck Institute. She is an internationally recognized expert in the field of mosaics in Ukraine, curated art project about preserving Soviet heritage in different aspects. One of them is the large exhibition and trade fair area in Kiev, which is a little bit similar to this in Moscow. And since 2015, she is active in the self-organized art initiative DND, what means where, not where, and is focusing on art and public space in remote areas and in small and medium towns. And I think this is very important. And since the 1st of April, you are here in Berlin and joined the research training group of identity and heritage at the Technical University. Maybe you, may I ask you also to present yourself because of the camera, then people who are in online with us, they know who is represented and presented here. Ah, yes. Okay. Yes, then you of course, and then you have the chance, of course, to present yourself. Then I would like to welcome Oksana Gorinovich. Some of you know her already because she is an architect and art historian based or coming from Minsk, but working and studying and doing her PhD here in Berlin. She's the senior researcher at Technical University Aachen today in the project of Stadtkultur and Bauen, and was a curator of, let's call them, comparative exhibitions on Belarus and Germany in on different levels. And she's a member of the Society of Architectural Historians, and she's a member of ICOMOS Belarus, which has, it's not dissolved, I think, but it has spread over in all countries abroad of Belarus. And I would like to welcome Mikhail Ilchenko, who is from Yekaterinburg. He did his studies in history and culture at Eastern Europe, and now he is in Leipzig at the GWZO. He studied in Yekaterinburg, graduated as PhD in the Russian Academy of Science, and he is focusing on various aspects of urban transformation in Eastern Europe. And his recent book publication, where he was co-editor and co-author, was Post-Utopian Spaces, Transforming and Re-Evaluating Urban Icons of Socialist Modernism. Currently, he's involved, like Oksana, in the joint research project Stadt, Kultur, Bauen on cultural heritage of construction in post-Soviet urban development. And I would like to present Svetlana Smolenska, who is a professor and lecturer at state and private universities in Kharkiv. She graduated in architecture and history of architecture in Lviv, in Moscow, and in Kharkiv. She's member of E-Commerce Ukraine and the International Scientific Committee, and she's also member of the Journalists of Ukraine. And her last exhibitions and publications was on Svoboda Square Ensemble in Kharkiv, which was presented here in Berlin. And she also contributed to the summary or to the anthology of Dokumomo on the situation multiple modernism in Ukraine, which was produced and published in the winter time with a project or with an article on the heroic period of Ukraine modernism, 1920s, 30s. And since last summer, she has a research scholarship from Volkswagen Foundation, and she presented this morning already the Kharkiv theater competition of 1931. And we have a surprising guest, a last guest, an additional guest, that is Semen Shikhoren from Ukraine. He studied and graduated in computer engineering, but he is focusing, and his research center is interwar and post-war modernism and the Stalinist, or including the Stalinist neoclassical architecture. So he's focusing on legacy of Soviet times. He's author of nearly 20 books and multiple architectures, and he is an architectural activist in heritage protection and author and curator of publications and exhibitions on modern heritage in Ukraine. And he is, or he will become affiliated to the GWZO in Leipzig, and that is the reason why we were able to invite him and to include him in this discussion. We are very grateful. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much for your audience, for your attention, and I would like to ask Dimitro Russo to take the floor and to present the two books on Russia and Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jörg, for the introduction. Okay. Hello everyone. Today is the second day of the workshop. We will focus more on Ukraine and Russia version of the books, and we will start with a short presentation of the socialist modernism as a concept or as a period, and I will present also the web platform. Which is connected to the books, and also the series of the book in which we will focus more on the Ukraine and Russia. Okay. The architecture of the socialist period, and more precisely the modernist tendencies between 1955 and 1991 as a concept, are becoming more and more popular in specialist circles. In our case, socialist modernism is a research platform created by the BACU Association, Baku, focusing on those modernist trends from Central and Eastern Europe, which have been insufficiently explored in the broader context of global architecture. Socialist modernism is an approach to architecture that was typical to the former socialist countries between 1955 and 1991. most of it left uncovered by architecture history writings. The modernist trend was officially adopted as a result of historical events. 1955 was the official moment when useless stylistical elements in architecture were abandoned, by decision of Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party. From there on, Stalinist or realist socialist architecture was replaced through the socialist bloc. The new stage, post-World War II reconstruction of the cities. Countries in the former socialist bloc suffered massive destruction of their built environment, and city reconstruction was conducted in a precarious economic context, which required special economic, social, and logistical strategies in order to be able to cover the necessary urban infrastructure, housing, industrial buildings, and public buildings. New to the urban tissue, a set of economic policies were adopted, expressed in architecture by design blueprints and by a completely different stylistical orientation. The new building design direction made it compulsory to get rid of useless stylistical elements, but also to put shapes, to adorn facades by a truthful highlighting of wall parts and of large panel elements. The socialist ideological rule of creating identical blueprints was adopted locally through projects that followed the canonized political guidelines while introducing certain elements to individualize buildings and to underline their modernist character. By officially renouncing useless stylistic elements as required by post-1955 urban policies, architects in Eastern Bloc found an opportunity to take architecture beyond the ideologically imposed limits. Key principles of modernism were adopted in architecture during this period. Form follows function, the use of mass production materials, industrial aesthetics, simplicity and clarity of shapes, rejection of unnecessary detail, etc. In this way, post-Stalinist architecture became a way to recover modernism. Hence, our option to define this trend in architecture or phenomenon, socialist modernism. Socialist modernism is a desire to go back to pre-World War II modernism, with architecture attempting to fulfill both cultural requirements and utilitarian and economic ones, the latter having priority. At the same time, the society resents this type of architecture because of the policies enforced by socialist authorities. Often this heritage is not seen for what it is, a complex of architectural objects or urban ensembles, but as a result of bad policies. Central and Eastern Europe, Caucasus region, and Central Asia boast a number of important architectural monuments that are representative for the post-World War II identity of each country and express the aspiration of socialist-era architects, starting in 1955 and ending with the fall of communism in 1991. Between 1955 and 1970, Central and Eastern Europe, Caucasus region, and Central Asia experienced a strong urban development as a result of industrialization visible in all cities and districts, in large and medium cities, Berlin, Warsaw, Budapest, Prague, Bratislava, and others. Collective living neighborhoods divided in micro-districts built during that period covered large areas and included all complementary functions: health, education, culture, shopping, sport, etc. Some of the most important buildings associated with socialist modernism were erected at that time. It was a time when the built environment knew a sharp increase, explaining why these buildings formed the large majority in many socialist cities. If these urban areas are not protected as a whole, the general image of the city will suffer. Even if we have some examples of good practice of conservation, at least at maybe promising future restoration works by authorities, which is great, most part of these buildings are still found today in an advanced state of decay. In today's economic and political situation, there is a great risk that these buildings will disappear, some of them being already illegally demolished or brutally renovated, without taking into account their architectural value. On the other hand, we were able to notice that the interest for this type of architecture has increased. One way to measure is the success of socialist modernism. The platform initiated by Baku, including a website, Facebook pages, Instagram, Tumblr, Pinterest, and so on. So far, we have counted about 1 million users. The growing online trend and the vivid interest of platform members encourage us to extend our initiative with a database and an interactive map. Even if a large part of them are not actively involved, rather they were spectators attracted by obscure and abandoned edifices. On the other hand, publishing and promoting the works of that period in social media could help us save this forgotten heritage, whose incontestable historic, aesthetic, and cultural value has long been ignored. Proposed solutions. An important part of safeguarding socialist modernist heritage is played by the Socialist Modernism Initiative. Its actions are directed at rehabilitating and conservation of buildings in Central and Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia, and other regions. Our initiative seeks statistical discipline and the involvement of both local authorities and the civil society in the process, so as to raise awareness to the architectural value of the buildings, urban planning, and the social and cultural urban tissue still existing. We are currently working on the socialistmodernist.com map and database, which are part of a wider program we launched in 2013. Its long-term objectives are to protect and promote valuable architecture built in the former socialist bloc between 1955 and 1991. Its short-term objectives are to list, document, archive, and distribute information on socialist modernist heritage from Central and Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia, and other regions. The Socialist Modernism interactive map and smartphone application reveal the most valuable examples of modernist architecture created in the socialist period, from buildings to neighborhoods, park, recreation areas, etc. The website offers you the possibility to navigate through the map in all countries of the former socialist bloc. Objects are identified according to the architectural, artistic and urban value criteria, as well as rarity, that is often exceptional. They are organized by functional typologies: housing, education, research, culture, medicine, transport, leisure facilities, sport, industry, parks, and public spaces, and monuments, which are associated with socialist modernism. The search allows the selective text searches and the 4 filters: country, current state, building, and function. Unmonitored objectives or sites are provided with the following details: name, site, planning institute, planning and construction period, literature references, and contribution of the research material. An experimental version of the map, version 2, is already available on our website, socialistmodernist.com. We would like to turn this map into an interactive community-driven tool to help us grow our database and increase the awareness needed to preserve these buildings. We have also created a mobile app that allows anyone to contribute our map. Users are able to locate sites on our map and find directions to them, and add new sites they discovered, upload their own pictures made on site. The information already introduced in the database on a trial basis is available to experts and members of the public who have an interest in socialist modernist heritage. They are also invited to contribute with information, images, and videos to the database. All information originating outside the association will be checked and confirmed by database admins. It must be said that we are still working on the map. That is why some of the options, such as video downloads or user forum with individual accounts, are not yet accessible. They will become active one by one once the map is fully operational. Furthermore, we are building a community-driven section to better coordinate the efforts made at local level and help organize our members. Anyone who is passionate about this historical period will be able to join our cause on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, or Pinterest by posting with the hashtag Socialist Modernism. All the important socialist modernist landmarks will be included in this platform, allowing them to be accessed by anyone interested. The Bureau for Art and Urban Research Baku is an association for conservation and urban and cultural rehabilitation. Its main lines of action are to protect, preserve, and rehabilitate socialist built heritage and art works. More precisely, to monitor the maintenance, protection, and conservation activities in Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus region, Central Asia, and other countries, allied to the former socialist bloc. Besides preserving the historical value of the buildings, we also strive to improve the general urban image. Next, I will present 10 books of Baku Association, published in the last 6 years, with the focus on Ukraine and Russia version, and a few architectural guide maps of the capitals of the former socialist bloc countries. I published a zoom of our attempt to raise awareness and convince the public about the value of this heritage are Baku publication on socialist modernism. The 10 inventory book entitled Socialist Modernism in Romania and Republic of Moldova includes 91 sites. It was published in 2020 on the second edition. The next one is Socialist Modernism in Germany. It includes 71 sites, and it has an introduction by Jörg Haspel. The book was published in 2018, and it was also published in 2021 on the second edition. Socialist Modernism in former Yugoslavia includes 67 sites, with an introduction by Sandra Uskokovic, and it was published in 2020. Socialist Modernism in Eastern Bloc includes 130 sites and was published in 2020 and also includes around 30 countries. Socialist Modernism in Ukraine includes 67 sites with an introduction by Vitaly Shulyar, and it was published in 2021 in March. Here is a summary presentation of the main functional categories of socialist modernist structures implemented with some local adaptation in the Soviet Ukraine, as they were through the socialist bloc. Education institutions have, as required by their function, a differentiated ground floor, a minimalist level made of particles with large glazed areas and facades decorated by vertical concrete sections, metal elements, sculptural or mosaics insertion, or geometrical perforated panels distributed on the whole facade. For instance, the lecture and the cinema hall of the Institute of Scientific and Technical Information in Kiev, aka Kiev Flying Saucer. It was built in 1971 and it was designed by Yuryev and Novikov. When I took this shot, it was undergoing forced transformation to become part of a large commercial center. Maybe our colleagues from Ukraine could update us about the actual state of the building later. The next building is Institute of Marine Engineers from Odessa, Ukraine. It was built in 1975 by Ryblitsky and Kolomitsev. The former Palace of Young Pioneers and School Children, now Center for Culture and Creativity for Children and Youth in Galicia or Galicia. It is located in Lviv, Ukraine. It was built in the 80s, in 84, by Vashak, Smetana, Podlesny, and engineers Pisa. The next one is the Assembly Hall of the Institute of Nuclear Research for National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. It was built in the 70s, and it has a very phenomenal, let's say, mosaic with the name "The Struggle for the Peaceful Atom" by artists Zubchenko and Prishetko. Cultural places are generally regular, raw shapes dominated by full walls and decorated with mosaics, panels, or vertical concrete. This is the Palace of Culture from Lvov. It don't have mosaics, but I think the forms are very interesting. Palace of Pioneers and School Children, now Palace of Children and Youth from Kiev, Ukraine. It has a few mosaics on the inside, and it was a very nice mosaic here on this fountain. But I don't know what is it now. I think it was changed or something. it was renovated and put it in the same place.
Now it's fine.
Yeah, okay. And also this structure had a very interesting stair outside, but it was demolished, I think. So now, and this is, I think, is a new addition to the building or something. So it was a little bit changed. The next function is residential developments, which are usually bar or tower shaped, with a regular structure and small windows. One of the examples is the Obolon Collective Housing Tower. There are two, I think, or three? Two, okay. They were built in 81 by Budilovsky, Kolomets, Katzin, and others. The next one is the function of administration headquarters, and they are considerable in size, often inspired by post-war international architecture. And here we have the computer center from Lvov. It was built in 62 till 67, and the author is Miron Vesnilovich. Transport and telecommunication buildings stand out by their diverse volumes, while keeping in line with the minimalist principle. They are more varied in shape and local adaptation. This is an original building, which is part of a bus station and a hotel, as I remember. So this is a Lviv bus terminal, which was built in the 80s. By Sahay Dakivsky and Stolyarov. And also this building is on the cover of the Ukraine book. Or another example is the bus station in Kiev, which are today, I don't know, I think some years ago I saw some information about this building. It was restored or something.
Yes, they were renovated and now they're
okay, so they have this very valuable, let's say, work of art. They are like combined mosaic and mural works by Melnichenko and Rybachuk, and they were created in 61. This is the stairs from this bus station, and it's in a spread on the book. So it's very nice. Like, look. And another function from the transportation sites is this lateral platform, which is a part of a sculptural group which is called Peace and Labor. On the other part, it's another platform with a lady which have this sign of peace, and this could be a sign of labor. They were built in the 60s by a large team of architects, engineers, and sculptors. Shops decorated with mosaic panels, service and luxury buildings, future wide open spaces, porticos and large glazed surface. Complexes of buildings are connected by general stairs, passages and large terraces. This is another example, which is the Okean shop from Lviv, which was built in 1982, designed by architects Kamenschik and Mastilo. It was unfortunately demolished in 2019, even if the owner had pledged to preserve most valuable part of a large mosaic panel by artist Patik, which decorated the entire front facade and was unscrupulously destroyed. No?
They made a mosaic that looks like the state on the side of the window.
Okay, but the old mosaic, the original.
The original was destroyed.
Yeah, so now, by the author. Okay, so the building is the same, or they have another building there?
Another building, absolutely another, much higher, and different architecture.
Okay. Monumental art was often used in architectural and spatial composition that made it possible to introduce the monumental image in the specific context of the socialist city. Such are the 6 well-known mosaics panel on the facades of residential buildings on Victory Avenue in Kiev by architects Ladny, Budilovsky, and the development was built in 71. Hosting public commercial function on the ground floors. The large mosaics were signed by artists Ivan Litovchenko and Vladimir Pryatka with Ernest Kotkov. The photo album and digital architectural guide, Socialist Modernism in Ukraine, is an attempt to provide information on an essential area of architectural history in Ukraine. It describes a time when a lot of was built, residential buildings, urban ensembles, park, recreational facilities, public buildings and monuments, and so on. This period, still ignored by the history of architecture, is indelibly connected to the image of the Ukrainian society as a whole. The book is all the more useful as it focuses on a period of social and economical changes in the socialist era that still contain many unknown elements. The next one will be the book on Russia. It's called Socialist Modernism in Russia. Includes around 80 sites with an introduction by Natalia Dushkina, and it was published in 2022. Here is a summary presentation of the main categories of socialist modernist structures and punctual information about the conservation status of some of these outstanding urban architectural and art sites, at high risk of being altered or lost forever. Residential development are usually bar or tower shaped with a regular structure and small windows. Here we have an example with block of flats on Mir Prospect, which means Peace Avenue. It has 25-story high, erected on reinforced concrete pillars that allow traffic underneath. The building has a repetitive volumetric pattern and is made of concrete panels precast in the vibro-prebore method, used extensively for similar buildings. Cultural places are generally regular, row shapes dominated by full wall and decorated with mosaic panel or vertical concrete elements. In cities and small towns or communes, cultural places usually generated a public space for the community. For instance, such as the October Cinema in Moscow, built in 1967 by architects Pasokhin and others. Education and research institutions and sport facilities have as required by their function a differentiated ground floor, such as the Institute of Robotics and Technical Cybernetics in St. Petersburg. It was built during 73 and 86 by Savin and Artyushin. Transport and telecommunication buildings stand up for their versatile volumes while keeping in line with the minimalist principle. They are more varied in shape and local adaptation. One such example would be the Pulkovo Air Terminal in St. Petersburg, built in 1972 by architects Zhuk, Vlanin, Ugrumova, Somenskaya, and others. Administration headquarters and exhibition buildings are considerable in size, often inspired by Western pre-World War II modernism or post-war international architecture. They are defined by massive shapes, large glazed surfaces on the facades, but small individual windows, as well as international structure reflected in the aesthetics of the facade. We must mention here the 4 26-story administrative buildings, shaped as an open book in the southern part of New Arbat Avenue in Moscow. A large commercial area occupies the first 2 floors of the complex, creating a visible row of shops, service facilities, and restaurants. This book on Russia focuses on the conservation status of the urban areas and the architecture of the cultural, educational, residential, administrative, and other socialist modernist buildings. Also includes monumental art examples. Each chapters reflecting the development of post-war architecture in Russia. The volume is addressed to a professional public of architects, historians, engineers, as well as the architecture lovers in general. Another 3 books published during the 21 and 22 are Socialist Modernism in Poland with 71 sites, with an introduction by Blazes Charkovsky. Socialist Modernism in Bulgaria with 67 sites, with an introduction by Emilia Kaleva and Anita Vasilieva, which made yesterday an intervention. Socialist Modernism in Hungary, which includes 71 sites, which was published in 2022. And our freshly launched Socialist Modernism in Caucasus with 71 sites, published in 2023. I have to mention that we will launch in the next 2 months the book entitled Socialist Modernism in Baltic countries, which is now in production, with contributions from Laura Ingerpu and Vaidas Petrulis. The combined concept of photo album and digital guide with QR codes connected to our Socialist Modernism interactive map and smartphone application on Apple and Google Play is an objective illustration of the Socialist Modernist phenomenon through a series of examples of buildings and architectural ensembles erected between 1955 and 1991 in the former Eastern Bloc countries. The materials are the results of field research and archive and library work performed by Baku Association. The members of the association started documenting the trend 10 years ago and are still in the process of checking and adding information. In addition to the mentioned books, we continue to publish a series of maps with the capitals of countries from the former socialist bloc: Chisinau, Bucharest, Yerevan, Tbilisi, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Berlin, Minsk, Warsaw, Belgrade. The last 3 are in the production. So this is an example of the map. It has a cover and inside is the map, which is an imaginary map, which was made by a French artist, Ala Rusu, which is my sister, which was co-opted for the painting works in our editorial projects. Although built during the socialist regime, these edifices promoted by Baku have been conceived in local contexts that were favorable to architectural creation, inspired by pre-World War II modernism and Western modernism. Socialist Modernist platform invites architects, urban planners, historians, and art historians, conservationist artists, activists, and anyone interested in this issue to contribute and to broaden the platform. Send us any information regarding neighborhoods, buildings, monuments, parks, and cultural landscapes, or any relevant architectural elements. Please don't forget to specify their location and address. All the information will be published on our website under the name of the author. In 2016, the association initiated the classification process for 4 socialist modernist buildings in Chisinau, Republic of Moldova. And in August 2019, the State Circus, designed by Ike Rechenko and Simeon Shohet in Chisinau, became a protected monument after a decision of National Historical Monument Committee of Moldovan Ministry of Culture. And in May in 2022, it was included in the Historical Monuments Register. Another great news is that on July 27, 2022, the National Hotel in Chisinau, by architects Adolf Garbuntsov and others, became a protected monument as well. So the Socialist Modernist Research platform initiated by Baku in 2014 starts to make a visible impact with the classification of the Chisinau State Circus, the Hotel National, and the Cluj Telephone Palace, part of our wider aim to raise awareness for the value of socialist architecture in the second half of the 20th century. The Socialist Modernism initiative plays an important part in safeguarding socialist heritage built 1955 and 1991. We are currently working on the revitalization proposals for several socialist modernist objects built in cities, municipalities of Romania and Republic of Moldova. In the first phase of this project, we will concentrate on the analysis, research study, followed by the second phase, when we will elaborate regulation and will deal with education on local authorities and the inhabitants of those protected areas through a legislative program concerning the architectural stylistic of the buildings districts erected in the socialist era. The proposal suggests the demolition of parasitic structures, prohibiting the closing of balconies and any type of DIY abusive rehabilitation, removing excessive advertising from the facades, and finally making these buildings, neighborhoods, leisure facilities, park, etc., part of historical heritage. So thank you very much for listening. Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I have to excuse that I disturbed you a little bit, but we are late and we have 7 additional and comments on the whole issue, and we will try to finalize it in a ending discussion, which is closing up at the end. So we have 7 more presentations or short comments. One of them is
Good evening. Okay, I'm Anna Brnavitska, and I will speak a little about the transformation of attitude, public awareness, and research interest, and also in socialist modernist architecture in Russia in recent years. But first of all, I would like to thank Dmitry Russo for his introduction and his incredible project. I think it's so important, especially the part with the map. And I also have a question, who is actually the photographer? But you can tell me that later. It's interesting for me that Baku's project started in 2014. It is about the same time when we in Moscow with a group of colleagues formed Institute of Modernism. Probably it was 2013, and it was after a few years of the growing interest in such architecture. But when I was looking at your images of Ukrainian architecture of the period, I realized that that very few of the buildings are familiar to me, because I visited both Lviv and Kiev before that time. So this architecture just fell into blind spot in my perception, and I think that's how most of the people see it, or rather don't see it as architecture. It's a built environment that's familiar but not interesting, or something sometimes ugly, and so on. And that perception is changing, I think, under the influence of several factors. First of all, of course, the time itself. It's not the yesterday, yes, not last year's fashion, but actual history. And for young people who are actually born after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's really history and maybe intriguing and something not normal every day. So the time distance is the main factor. The second factor, I think, is the spreading of digital photography and social networks, because when first digital cameras appeared and then smartphones, everyone was started making pictures. And when people start to make pictures, they want to post online to show off before their friends, they're looking around trying to find interesting subjects. So people who were not specifically interested in architecture started to be intrigued by these visual images of Soviet mosaics and sculptures and buildings themselves. And if we are speaking about research interest, I think that colleagues in post-Soviet countries followed the steps of the Western colleagues who started to closely looking into post-war modernist architecture maybe 10 years before. And the interest in Soviet heritage, in my experience, was first provoked by this outside interest by Western colleagues. And I think that photographers actually play a very important role in this changing perspective, because they actually teach people to look at this architecture with new eyes, to understand its aesthetic qualities, its strange beauty, and maybe sometimes focusing on its strangeness, but still they focus our attention, and people start to think about why did these buildings were actually built, what were their function, why many of them are dilapidated now, which functions are no longer relevant in the market society, especially suffering the huge cinemas, for example. In Soviet times, they built cinemas for 1,000 seats or even 1,400 seats, and now it's just impossible to fill these buildings with customers. So this public interest in turn gets served by different initiatives. Again, thanks to the social networks, it is possible to offer sightseeing trips on any subjects, including socialist realist architecture, and people would gladly go and learn something new. In Moscow, this initiative called Moscow Through the Eyes of Engineers, and now they partly moved to Yerevan, not wanting to continue in Russia. Another practice is urban sketching. You know, it's also a very popular pastime when people with no artistic training start to sketch in the city, and they're guided by professional artists, and the program, the itinerary, is formed by some architectural historian, for example, me. And again, they post their results online and create more interests. And of course, there are several exhibition programs, some of them international, some of them just initiated by various cultural institutions. And again, we are talking about public interest. But what about the preservation? I think in Russia, the most serious attempt was made about 7 years ago. You know, the Russian preservation law demands that 40 years passed since the completion of the buildings. And as more and more buildings built in the 60s and the 70s passed this 40 years limit or approaching it, the Union of Architects tried to make a group application to the preservation authorities to include a selection of about, I think, 70 buildings from throughout Russia. They were selected by the experts, and of course, these experts include some of architects who were active during the era. But this group application was rejected, flatly rejected. And for several years, the procedure to nominate a building or a complex to be listed demanded that a person or a body who make an application will present the whole expert conclusion, the whole research, which is rather time and labor consuming and isn't paid. So the process stuck. But in several instances, when we managed to find resources to prepare this research beforehand and to make applications, they all were rejected. Every one of them were rejected. Actually, from this period, Moscow, for example, has like 2 or 3 buildings protected. So it's not in the interest, you know, this, the decision makers didn't make the same evolution of thinking as the public. So not much progress in this case, but the only hope that we had, again, I'm talking about the situation before the war. Now Russia has some young architects who deeply care about this kind of heritage and who are able to make renovation very delicately with great respect to the original architectural and artistic values of the structures. And we have some very good examples in Kazan, in Nizhny Novgorod, and also in Moscow. But what will happen now, we don't know. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation, for the comment, and for presenting the situation and the development or the problems in the Russian Federation. Now we'll continue with Pavlo Kravchuk, who will be assisted by Mikhail Ilchenko, and then we have Evgenia Molyar with her presentation, and then we will see how we can include or implement Vitaly Shulyar again, who had some sound problems, but we hope that we have solved it. It's up to you.
Дякую. Вітаю усіх. Тема українського модернізму заслуговує уваги. Перш за все, нагальністю повернути її до історичного контексту ХХ століття.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to see you all, and the topic, the issues of Ukrainian modernism, deserve a special attention. Okay. Yes. A special attention due to opportunity to rethink the perspective of the 20th century.
Тому що у наших сучасних виданнях, присвячених ХХ століттю, виданнях українських, модернізм відсутній, як, перш за все, життєве явище, яке формувало середовище життя більшої частини населення України.
In our contemporary editions, in fact, the modernism as a phenomena which shaped the living conditions and living environment, in fact, is missing.
А тепер дуже стисло тези, які, як я вважаю, допоможуть нам вирішити цю проблему. Перш за все, необхідно усвідомити, що у Радянському Союзі модерністів не існувало.
So I would like to offer you a number of theses, arguments, which perhaps would help to go in this direction. And my first thesis is that in the Soviet Union there were no any modernist architects.
Реально опитані люди, які працювали на регіональному рівні, на різних щаблях, тут вони представлені, ніяк себе, власне, як модерністи не ідентифікували.
So those people who were working on the regional level, the portraits are here, they never identified themselves as modernists.
Це перша теза. Друга теза. Радянський модернізм, як ми його вже називаємо у сучасній історіографії, а тоді сучасна соціалістична архітектура, це була ідеологія радянського урбанізму.
So the second point I would like to emphasize is that what we call as modernism and modernist practice, in fact, appear to be a sort of ideological embodiment of contemporary architecture.
Яка вирішувала завдання, перш за все, прагматичне. Вона мала пов'язати у одну картину світа усі технологічні процеси, які відбувалися з нестримним розширенням міського простору протягом 60-х, 70-х років.
So it was of a very pragmatic nature, and it could put together this ideology very different phenomena, like for instance the need to reorganize the urban space and so living conditions. So
Власне, такі концепції, як НЕР, це були, скажімо, контрконцепції загальній ідеології радянської архітектури, які певним чином намагалися показати, що зростання не може бути нескінченним. Необхідно для комфортного середовища мати певні нормативи.
So those conceptions which are associated and sometimes claimed as modernist, in fact, was as counter-conceptions, the response to solving the pragmatic, practical issues, like, for instance, organization of the spatial territory and the growth, urban growth in that period.
Щодо, власне, українського модернізму, ми домовилися так його називати, української соціалістичної архітектури, вона, перш за все, має наздоганяючий характер, а простою мовою епігонський. І певні моменти, як проблему художньої творчості, визнавали і самі архітектори. Коли ми почитаємо семінари при правлінні радянських архітекторів, які збиралися з певною періодичністю, там це питання порушував в тому числі хан Магомед. Ми не маємо сумніву, що він розумів, про що казав.
So what we call as Ukrainian modernism or Ukrainian socialist modernism is a very specific thing which in fact demonstrated the character of lagging behind or epigonic character which is trying to follow some special narrative. And for instance, the Selim Khan Magomedov, a scholar, he was just making his own response to this topic, and he understood well this problem, this contradiction, deep contradiction in the modernism.
Оригінальність радянського модернізму, точніше українського радянського модернізму, вона, скажімо так, носила характер не етнокультурний, не національні мотиви, а це новий феномен лідерства на рівні регіонів. І саме оригінальність позначається на лідерах, які визначали архітектурний поступ в найбільш урбанізованих регіонах.
So what we can call as originality and authentic character of the Ukrainian socialist modernism stems from not from ethno-cultural character, not from some ethnic roots, but mostly it can be just interpreted in terms of the leadership and new leaders of the Soviet architecture who shaped some special criteria and were trying to move towards new conception and ideas.
Становлення соціалістичного модернізму в Україні призвело до появи феномену концептуального міста, коли, крім основного плану, виконаного у будівельних об'ємах, мав існувати і план, який пов'язував просвітницькою роботою, діяльністю професійних інституцій, тіла міста у єдиний організм і доносила це до населення.
So the idea of Ukrainian socialist modernism and so the Ukrainian socialist modernism practice in fact launched this rise of the new urban conceptions, conceptualization of urban growth itself when these territories and spaces were considered as a complicated organism, not just a urban design plane, not just of architecture, but also as a just social phenomena and educational practice. So just this new conceptual, more complicated vision of this phenomena.
І відповідно, коли другий концептуальний план фрагментувався у зв'язку з розпадом Радянського Союзу, почалися процеси деградації міської тканини практично в усіх містах України.
So when this more or less united conceptual vision of urban growth faced the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was fragmented, and finally we can see this decline of the initiatives in different parts of industrial areas of Ukraine.
Явище, яке ми називаємо соціалістичний український модернізм, воно призвело до появи великого міського, організованого певним чином простору, який став простором споживання.
So Ukrainian socialist modernism helped to establish this special view of urban area and conceptual urban thinking about the organism of city's development.
Це ви бачите відкриття американської виставки у Сокольниках, коли, власне, це народження радянського суспільства споживання і відбувалося.
So, and yeah, it's just also linking to the previous commentary. So here you can see the opening of the American exhibition in 1962, which shows the appearance and establishment of consumer and society, which was also launched by this conceptualizing of urban growth in Ukraine by socialist modernists.
Радянський модернізм призвів у кінцевому підсумку до деідеологізації міського простору. Це, крім житлових масивів, де було, скажімо так, понищено колективний контроль, державний контроль, до ось таких виконаних в інтернаціональному стилі зі специфічними функціональними моментами будівель громадського призначення.
So one of the benefits, one of the outcomes of the socialist modernism that helped Soviet in Ukraine in the Soviet period, that it helped to reconsider the main urban practices either on the level of the urban space in general and also in the cases of the concrete building, for instance, of administration nature.
Розширену аргументацію ми надавати не будемо, бо у нас немає часу. Але коли у когось будуть запитання, ось моя адреса, звертайтеся, більш розширений матеріал вам буде переслано поштою.
So the broader arguments would be difficult to be given right now, but if you have any questions, you can contact me by email. And
Власне, над цим матеріалом ми будемо працювати далі з німецькими партнерами, адже є для цього привід.
so we're planning to work with the same materials, with these materials together in collaboration with the German partners. And well, it's
Дякую. Дякую.
Now we will continue with the presentation of Eugenia Molja. Yes? Okay. So I may invite you. The floor is yours.
Hello everyone. I have some few remarks because I don't know how to talk about social architectural heritage without mentioning how this heritage is being destroyed by Russians in Ukraine. So I start with a fragment of our archival materials from the exhibition we organized as DND initiative in 2018. In Severodonetsk, it's an exhibition about urban planning project of Severodonetsk. This city was founded by in the first 5 years of Soviet era in Donbas region, and mostly it was built after the Second World War in frame of post-war reconstruction, according to a unique project developed by local expert for this area. So in our exhibition, we want to emphasize that it's not a typical Soviet settlement, but it's a unique Ukrainian settlement, was founded in Soviet period. And following a long and fierce struggle in 2022, Russian army occupied the city and destroyed it by 90% said official data. But not only firearms pose a threat to Ukrainian Soviet cultural heritage, this heritage is under a double threat. Because Soviet era history is subject to constant manipulation and speculation by Kremlin propaganda, and in the occupied territories, Russian occupiers restore Lenin's monument and close to flag of Russian Federation put Soviet red flags. As a result, this heritage now less and less associated with former Ukrainian SSR and more with modern Russian Federation. And yes, and this leads to growing intolerance and hatred towards this heritage in society. This is not about modernistic architecture, but it's about commemorative Ukrainian Soviet heritage. It's an entire part of this heritage. The situation became critical, especially after the full-scale invasion, and this photo, the removal of Soviet era monuments, most of it I found in regional media and in social media with the caption "Dismantling monuments to Russian soldiers." Why did Soviet soldiers become Russian soldiers? Because Soviet is no longer perceived as Ukrainian past, but only as Russian present. But this photo is for me, which depict a former Soviet soldiers being shot by modern Russian soldier, is a very telling proof that is not the same. Due to such manipulations, Ukrainian society ready to get rid of the cultural heritage of the complex, dramatic, and colonial past. But the past of our country, of our people, who even in totalitarian times not only preserve their subjectivity, traditions, culture, and language, Moreover, it created a new, unique Ukrainian Soviet cultural phenomenon, which is now unfortunately disappearing completely and very rapidly. And this is concerned not only Ukraine, because we could see that in Baltic countries, for instance, the Soviet heritage is being destroyed, and is being destroyed as something associated with Russia, as a result of the fact that Russian Federation has compromised their great culture with their great crimes. Today, researchers of socialist heritage are faced with the task of reappropriating this heritage from Russianness. We need to emphasize local regional schools, which had their history, their own history, not only thanks to, but also and mostly in spite of Russian domination. I think it should be very symbolic and right, exclude from list of this publication a book about Russian modernism, because for too long Russia has dominated, especially in this area. And now our professional solidarity should be talking about Armenian, Uzbek, Estonian modernism without Russian. Let local researchers talk about their modernist without Russians. And I would also like to see solidarity from our Russian colleagues, who would not only speak out against the war, but act against it. And in our situation, this action is a silence, nothing personal. But don't allow the Russian voice to be heard in the cultural field, because it intensified Russia on the battlefield. It's my point. Thank you for your attention.
For the closing remark or thesis which should be discussed, I would propose that we continue with the statements, and now it is up to Oksana Gorinovich to comment the books, and then at the end we will try to... Sorry? You have no comment? you are on my list, okay. Then we can go on with the presentation of Mikhail Ilchenko. You have a presentation. It's not commenting the books, but then let's try, and at the end we will ask Vital Shelia from LIV to join us. Please.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I will try to keep the time limit. Well, in fact, once again, I would like to identify myself, first of all, as a sociologist. So I'm interested in the processes which are currently going on. And concerning socialist modernism, there are two things which I emphasize. The first thing, the perception, which is changing at the moment. And the second thing, activity. For that reason, I'm especially thankful for the previous speaker putting a special accent on this sphere. So I would like to apply for the case and for the experience of the city where I was born and where I spent most of my life. The city which is interested due to very specific tradition of the modernist architecture, because due to the, according to the density of the interwar modernism, this is one of the, well, leading places in the whole space of the former Soviet countries, may be comparable only to Kharkiv. And also what is interesting in terms of the architectural issues is, on the one hand, continuity of this tradition from the interwar period to the, let's say, so-called second wave, and in some sense even a succession. During the last 5-6 years, so especially before start of the war, before the invasion, Yekaterinburg marked a quite a real growth of activities around the heritage of socialist modernism. So several groups of activists made few guidebooks, online catalogs, so everything that was mentioned here, so in one way or another, and different activities. My concern regarding the topic was to understand what is happening at the moment, what was happening after the 24th of February, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I would like to make a special focus on the interview which I made on December 2021 with one of the prominent urban activists in the field, with Polina Ivanova, when I asked her, well, how would you say, what is the main obstacle to you? What is the main challenge to you while working? So I expected to hear the answer regarding the finances, communication with authorities, and so on. And she answered very clearly, this is a lack of narrative, lack of clear myth. I don't know how to present this architecture for the broad audience. I'm trying to share this experience with other regions with different countries, but I don't know how to make it plausible, credible, well, comprehensible for the broad audience. So, I asked the second question, but still, what would you use as a basis for constructing this narrative? She answered, and this was December year 2021, that perhaps it would be associations with demilitarization, democratization, openness, and consumerism. So when I rereading this interview right now, so of course it sounds quite sad and dramatic, but it's very important to trace those activities which still didn't stop, in fact, in Russia, but acquired quite a very specific form. Together with colleagues, we've made around 30 interviews with different, mostly anonymous, with different people who were involved and currently involved in the activities regarding not only socialist modernism, but Soviet architecture in general. And I would just, as a part of discussion, just to point very preliminary, as we have a discussion, as we have a debate, to things which are emphasized. If we are speaking about so-called decolonization approach in terms of, in the scale of Eastern Europe and European scale, I would say that the very similar tendencies can be found in Russia in the scale of the Russian side. Because if Ukraine asking, well, if we have unreal, why should we perceive Kharkiv as some kind of replica from Moscow, then the same story can be claimed and posed by the Ural Architectural School. And the same story can be seen here. And, you know, that as a sort of a distancing from Moscow, sometimes overestimated, exaggerated, I don't give any evaluation about that, becoming a sort of a psychological cover for those people who are trying to distance themselves from the war experiences, just being concentrated on a very local agenda, trying to overlook what is happening around. That's our feeling from speaking with different activists right now, because another very interesting tendency, and it can be testified by at least 3-4 projects which I'm keeping in mind at the moment, is a concentration on the local life of the neighborhoods. Socialist modernism as a way of dealing with very local agendas which are very far from any ideological, political, social issues. And here I have a clear linkage and, well, not just quite sad confirmation and what was told by Evgenia previously, because this is a way to go, not just to help or articulate any linkages, vice versa, opposite direction, be concentrated on something which is going very locally and going distance from any politics. It's quite interesting also story that for most people who stayed for different reasons in Russia or preferred to go on with the same activities, that this sphere is becoming a sort of a, let's say, I'm trying to be careful with categories, a sort of an internal migration, which of course well, resembles in some kind practices of the Soviet period, and becoming a sort of a, well, backdoor compromise with local authorities, which are allowing activists to act and to work in this field, on the one hand, giving some resources for that, but on the other hand, completely excluding them from discussing any political, social, ideological, even historical things which were quite acute even on December 2021, just comparing interviews with the same people. Unfortunately, for me, it's, I mean, dramatically, it proves most of the claims and pretensions and critics concerning that. But again, I mean, that's what we're having right now. Just as an example, this is a project, quite, well, complicated, interesting project, which was planned to be a part of a rethinking of the urban and modernist nature of Sverdlovsk, which finally came to become a sort of a local-oriented initiative to trace how the neighborhoods resembles the memories of these local areas, how they reflect a very special vision of these concrete places, staying again very distant from any ideological, political, social feeling, and more important, my last point, even trying to be distanced from putting it into the international context, at least in these concrete cases. Thank you.
Shulyar in Lviv. I thought you had already contact and the sound was clear, so maybe he can give his presentation and comment, and then we will continue here in the auditorium. Yeah.
I'm glad to take part in this interesting meeting, but I had no practice in conversation in English during last years, and if it's possible to get the translator from Ukrainian on English. Are you ready? May I begin? Добрий вечір, шановні учасники. Я радий взяти участь в такій цікавій дискусії про цей історичний період розвитку архітектури у Східній Європі і в Україні, зокрема. Мій виступ буде дуже короткий. Я думаю, що всю інформацію і візуально про архітектуру соціалістичного модернізму дав мій колега Дмитро Русу. Я лише хочу зробити пару зауваг про цей період. Ну, його рамки в часі починаються з 1955 року. І
Make a statement and then you will make a translation.
А можна вас попросити почати знову?
ще раз,
Вас просять просто зробити стейтмент, такий аргумент. Перший, як інтродукцію.
добре, ще раз. Добрий вечір, шановні учасники семінару.
Well, first of all, I'm really glad to be here as participants of the seminar.
Я радий взяти участь у цій зустрічі.
I'm glad to take part in this event.
No. Please, please let's make the statement at whole and then you can make the translation. Yeah, I know, but we didn't know about this translation problems before, but otherwise we have a sound system mistake so that we always have an echo on the whole stream.
How can you say, how can you keep it in mind?
They have the technique.
Now it's a statement, especially for our Ukrainian and Russian-speaking guests who are able to understand. And thank you very much for your readiness and willingness to support us. Then we will record it and then we can see later how it can be.
Будь ласка, ви можете говорити українською, просто ми пробуємо зрозуміти.
Так, я не зрозумів. Мені продовжувати?
Yes.
Добре. Я думаю, що візуальну презентацію архітектури соціалістичного модернізму періоду 55-91 року зробив по Україні зробив мій колега Дмитро Русов. Значить, в мене буде тільки декілька таких коротких зауваг. Translate, please. На мою думку, одною з таких основних причин такого корінного повороту в архітектурі 1955 року і відмові від того, що називали по-російськи термін украшательство, це була гостра проблема нестачі житла в Радянському Союзі. І розв'язати цю проблему інакше, як створивши базу індустріального домобудування і перевівши, власне, все житлове будівництво на такі індустріальні рейки, було, мабуть, неможливо. Ну, а, скажімо, традиційні архітектурні форми історичної архітектури, які характерні були для попереднього періоду, скажімо, цьому заважали. От, і, ну, от, як результат ми мали будівництво сотень заводів залізобетонних виробів, домобудівних комбінатів по всьому Радянському Союзу і появу наступні 2, а то й 3 десятиліття на околицях великих міст, великих житлових масивів, забудованих типовими будинками і з такою дуже, ну, скажімо, не скажімо скромною, але такою бідною архітектурою. Цей процес призвів і до змін у проектній практиці, тому що всі ці житлові будинки, громадські будинки, такі як школи, дитячі садочки, торгові центри, лікувальні заклади, були створені так звані типові проекти в Центральному проектному інституті інститутами в Москві, в тодішньому Ленінграді, у Києві, інших столицях тодішніх союзних республік. І робота архітектора, я це і сам маю такий досвід, зводилась до того, що на кожний будинок була готова проєктна документація, готові проєктні альбоми. Треба було тільки, скажімо, індивідуально розробити фундаменти, ну, скажімо, десь якісь корективи внести фасади, пов'язані з вертикальним плануванням, так, з різними відтисками, там, скажімо, по кутах будинку. От, а все решта було в тих альбомах, і в такому вигляді ця проєктна документація передавалася на будівництво. Значить, роль архітектора була зведена до мінімуму, все було поставлено на рейки будувати більше, швидше. І скажімо, про саму архітектуру як таку на якийсь період взагалі забув. Значить, це, зокрема, у Львові відгукнулося на тому, що у Львівському політехнічному інституті спеціальність архітектуру закрили взагалі на декілька років. І це було таке героїчних зусиль, зокрема, такого старшого професора Багенського, який ще залишився, ще викладав тут до Другої світової війни, який, як інтелігентна людина, взяв фрак, поїхав у Москву, в міністерство, добиватися відновлення архітектурної спеціальності у Львові. Власне, ті зразки архітектури соціалістичного модернізму, які ми, власне, показали у альбомі, випущено фондом Баку, це, власне, ця архітектура, яка робилася, скажімо, індивідуально.
Can you understand me? I have to interrupt you because we are out of time now, but I would like to thank you very much, even if I did not understand your comment, but we have recorded it, and I think we will try to reactivate and to revitalize the whole process of communication later. We underestimated the problems of an international, multinational, multilingual communication this evening. So thank you very much. And I would like to go further and ask Svetlana Smolenska and then our special guest to give their presentation, and then we will close.
I just only have some comments on this topic. No, unfortunately not. It is pity. I want to say some words about these albums. It is very useful publication for popularization of socialist heritage among the population. Images are the easiest and most accessible way to convey information to the average person. It is also important that the book of photographs clearly demonstrates how interesting and diverse this heritage is. This is the first broad step towards its evaluation. It is a pity that the publication devoted to Ukraine did not reflect the objects of this period from Kharkiv and Dnipro, for example, the two largest Ukrainian cities after Kiev. Although typical buildings were predominant in that period, but individual public buildings designed according to individual projects in the spirit of post-war modernism also began to appear from the end of 1950s in Kharkiv. For example, the cinema and concert hall Ukraine. The author was young in that period Kharkiv architects Yuri Plaksev and Vadim Vasilyev. And we visited your Congress hall, it seems to me, yes, it was given to Berlin from USA government, yes. So our Ukraine, whole Ukraine, this is something the same. It is a smaller, of course, but it is the same construction, cable stayed structure. So it will be interesting to find parallels between different buildings in the same. It was created, as I remember, that hall was created in 1957. Yes, is it right? Yes. So our architects created this project at the end of 50s. It seems to me 1959. I don't remember really, but similar time. So it's interesting, really. And the most successful individual projects were transferred to the category of reuse projects. In Kharkiv, there are examples of reuse projects. We have covered market. It is the reuse project from Kiev, a very interesting building also. And in turn, the Kharkiv Cinema and Concert Hall Ukraine was partially redesigned and reused in Kherson under the name Jubilee. So it is now very important building from that period for Kherson also. But not only individual buildings have value. Modernist urban planning principles embodied in large-scale residential areas were, in my opinion, the highest achievement of the late 1950s, 1980s. It was the idea of microzoning, a well-thought-out system of cultural and community services, landscaping, transport, and so on. The placement of schools, kindergartens, sports, places for recreation, and so on, cultural institutions, was calculated in advance for the number of residents, had its own service radius for accessibility and convenience. The norms included sanitary and hygienic requirements for ventilation and landscaping between house territories, insulation of each apartment. Already in the late of 1950s, large new residential area were being designed and built in Kharkiv, such Pavlovo Pole, Selekционная станция, and in 1970s, 80s, the construction of the giant Saltivka residential area for 300,000 inhabitants, maybe the largest in Ukraine, in the northeast of the city was underway, and then Alexeyevsky area also, residential area. Unfortunately, the attitude towards this heritage in society and in the leadership of the country is indifferent. It was, this attitude was formed before the war. Only a few objects were included in the list of monuments of local importance. For example, this whole Ukraine is in the list, put in the list of local importance only. The preservation of this socialist heritage became especially acute in connection with the military destruction. For example, whole Jubilee in Kherson got damage, and I have even photos, but sorry, I don't can show it now. The northern part of Saltivsky residential area in Kharkiv was subjected to severe destruction. Will they be restored if they still have not received a proper assessment, even from scientists? I think I think there is a need to develop at the international level a scientific substantiation, yes, of the value of this type of heritage, to develop a common strategy for its conservation for all interested countries. Thank you.
I don't know. I just tell a comment. Okay, so now I happen to be the last, so I can somehow summarize previously said ideas. Some ideas that I wanted to say are already here, and it is good because I feel that different people have similar ideas and similar feeling of what is going on. So I would like to start with an idea that I have a feeling that bringing together these two presentations is inappropriate, because I honestly understand that I'm from the position of inhabitant of a planet. I understand that Russian and Ukrainian socialist modernism heritage has equal value. That's not the point of discussion. But considering the situation of war, we understand that, yes, we understand that there are problems in preserving socialist modernist heritage in Russia. We understand that there are problems with including them into protection lists. We understand that there is a problem with understanding the value of perception of this architecture. But Ukraine has all the same problems, but also additionally, Ukraine has the problem of Russia itself. And that's why it's uncomparable to speak about, oh, the government doesn't want to include those buildings in the list. We have all those problems. Our government also doesn't want to include those buildings in the list. In Kiev, we have maybe only 10 buildings of socialist modernism that have protection, not more than 10. But at the same time, we have hundreds, maybe thousands of buildings destroyed during the war. So this also brings us many new problems, because if there was no war, there was some hope that in some time these buildings will have the protection. But as they are already destroyed, they won't have that protection. As they are already destroyed, they won't be rebuilt, as they don't have protection status. And another problem is that it was already told about it, the perception, the attitude to this architecture. Because of war, I feel that all my activities for last 6 or 7 years have to be started from the beginning, if from the beginning. Because actually, for all these years, I'm trying to speak to people and say that this is heritage, this is valuable, this is our heritage. It was done by our architects, sculptors, artists, engineers, and this is part of our. This should be part of our identity. But as war started, as Evgeny already said, it is even harder and harder to explain that this is ours, and we get a lot of heritage being destroyed, and our heritage is being destroyed, as it was said, from two sides. Because on one side we have war, and on another side we have that problem of hatred towards our heritage that is not yet considered. Because the problem is the same. Modernist heritage is too young to be understood as valuable from wide audience of people. And another thought that I wanted to say is, also was mentioned here, it was the criticism of Moscow-centered view. But the Moscow-centered view is, the reason of this view is obvious, because all these researchers were initially started in Moscow, and they were started based on Moscow processes. That's why we have this crucial dates for turning point of from interwar modernism to neoclassic Stalinist architecture date as 1932, because originally the process started from there. But if we research it based on Ukrainian architecture, we would see that this change happens later. In Kiev, you won't find any Stalinist architecture earlier than 1934, and even the projects that were developed as constructivist were remade in 1934. So we have another dates if we do research not based on some theory that was a result of concrete research based on Russian and Moscow-centered view. And the same for socialist modernism, because we everywhere have the date of 1955, and we know why this date is the starting date of socialist modernism, because it was the date when those decision to fight against excesses in architecture was taken. But you won't find any socialist modernism buildings in Ukraine built in 1955. You won't find them built in 1956. You won't maybe find almost nothing from 1957. But you will find Stalinist neoclassical architecture that was complete in 1957, in 1958, sometimes in 1964, sometimes in 1967 and 1968. So we have that inertia. And the first buildings, the building of Kiev bus station that was shown here and that is present in the book, it was the first modernist building in Kiev, and it was completed in 1959, 1960. And that's why it's very important to not just copy the commonly recognized dates, but to analyze the regional and local trends. So I would, if I speak about Ukrainian socialist modernism, I would start that with 1958. Or I know that Pavlo has another opinion that 1957, but definitely not 1955, because we have our local trends and specific dates. That's why it's very important to look at the history of architecture with your own eyes and be independent from another research that can be justified for some specific local dates, because I would not debate these dates for Moscow, but I would debate them for Ukraine. That's why it's very important not to have Moscow's centralized view, but to have independent view and based on your own data and your own research. And I hope, maybe I have some last phrase to finish and to summarize everything, that I hope that someday we will have an ability to make such kind of presentation where we would be in equal circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comment, or for this summarizing the whole, because I think you started that it is incomparable and inappropriate to discuss it, but I think and it was very productive, and I think it was very productive because of the conclusion you made, to think about not about the dates of the 30s and of 55 and of the speeches and of things, but to see the real life, what kind of heritage has survived and what is the reason and what are of course also the differences, and to reflect this. So it was, I think it was for us, all of us, it was in a short term, it was the result of this discussion, and I'm really very glad that it was possible, because it started a little bit tremendous and complicated, but I see it was worth to discuss it because of this conclusion. So I have to finalize it. You have the possibility to ask the main author and all the statement givers with a glass of wine or something, with a small snack outside. We are invited by the Max Lingner Foundation, which is not yet longer represented here. I think Thomas Ill is ill, Thomas Flill. He is bringing the book about Russia, maybe, if it was missed here. And I would like to cordially ask you and invite you tomorrow at 9 o'clock, not at 10 o'clock as it was written in the internet. At 9 o'clock we will start at Cafe not at Cafe Moscow, not at Cafe Kiev, but on the opposite side of Cafe Kiev, which is Kino International. We will start with the bus to Cottbus, and there we will be guided by the BTU, by the Brandenburg Technical University, and by the students and the Professor Blocker. We will have a visit of the university, of the town, and of the town hall, which are mentioned in the German album on so-called socialist modernist architecture. And then we will come back, and tomorrow in the evening we will have the presentation of the German book, and we will discuss it. And I hope that we can also include other aspects from other countries in this final discussion, and not only to discuss about the form this album. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you very much to Ms. Helmut and John Ziesemer for the support and for preparing, for continuing it, and Mr. Buchin for the sound and for the presentation here. I think it's rather complicated, and I hope that tomorrow we improve. Every evening we improve a little bit, so we have it's a growing and self-optimizing system we are trying here. So we will meet tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to see you again. Thank you very much. Okay.